Hello guys, today I want to demonstrate to you another new feature of Laravel 11, which was released actually after the release of Laravel 11 in a tweet by Taylor Otwell. So it is available in Laravel 11.0. something, in my case it was 11.0.8, which is context, and it was celebrated by community quite heavily with more than 1,000 likes on that tweet, and this is the short version. And I will show you a bit longer, more practical version in a minute. So basically, whenever in your application, so you add a value to some key and that is saved, then in the context for the rest of the application request lifecycle, including logs and queue jobs. That may be a massive help for debugging, so you would know which user, for example, or which other ID corresponds to some queue job or other operation. That feature is officially documented, so there's context documentation page, and I will link that in the description below. But as it often happens, the official release and the docs are not that much about practical implementation, so where and in which case to use that. And let me show you my example. So for example, if we compare the tweet by Taylor within HTTP request, where exactly you would add that code. And that should happen probably before controllers and before queue jobs, somewhere globally. And my best guess is middleware. So I've created a separate middleware with PHP artisan make middleware command and added this to middleware, which would save the current user ID. Then I registered that middleware to run all the time automatically with the new Laravel 11 syntax with middleware. So append my middleware globally, so it will run on every request. And by the way, side note, middleware doesn't mean restricting only. In middlewares you can set something for the rest of the application. Some people mistakenly think that middlewares are just about if statement and restricting something, checking like permission or something like that. Not necessarily. Middleware is just a file that will run early in the application lifecycle to check something but not necessarily restrict. In this case, it adds a value. And then in the controller, for example, we're doing something and we want to log some operation. And if you want that log message to contain user ID or any other information earlier, before context, what you would do? There are, of course, a few ways, but one of the ways you would do that directly in the message, for example, or it's possible to add a parameter to the message. To be honest, I don't remember the exact syntax, but there is a possibility. But what if you want to add that log in multiple places? So you would add user ID every time. This is where context is beneficial. You just log whatever you want. And now if you run that request, this is API request, this is some result, it doesn't really matter. And we go to laravel.log, it adds user ID null for a reason. In my case, user ID is null indeed because I'm not logged in. But if we log in and we can fake it, I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but there's auth, login, user ID, for example, user ID 1. And now if we launch that in the Postman, nothing changes in the response, but in the Laravel log, you see user ID 1. So this is how context works. Anywhere in any controller, you just log something, and that contains whatever information you saved in the context. But if we go back to the original tweet by Taylor, what he emphasized is that contextual data is also retained by any queued jobs. What does that mean actually? For example, if you dispatch some job from the controller, for example like this, and you want that job to contain some information like user ID, then you probably need to pass that ID as part of the job. So for example, inside of that job, I've created this log info, and now if we launch that, send, in Laravel log we have getting users, but we don't have job getting users yet because we haven't launched the queue. The queue worker hasn't been started yet. So that job may be executed in an hour, for example, where the session of user ID is long over, but the context would still appear. So now if we launch queue work, we have one job running, and now if we go to Laravel log, we have that including user ID 1. So this is kind of an oversimplified, maybe silly example with user ID, but you should get the whole idea of lifecycle, when to set the context and how to use it and what is the benefit. Of course, in case of user ID, you may use auth ID directly, but instead of user ID here, you may have any value. For example, generate some UUID for unique trace for this specific request for login or debugging purposes, which may be not available in any session or auth variable. And after the context feature was released, an interesting example appeared on Twitter by David, co-creator of Laravel Nova, who used context as a multi-tenancy feature, so adding current tenant and then using that elsewhere. But then, despite 200 likes under that tweet, there were a few comments against that usage of context. First, Michael pointed out that there's request user, and there's also auth user globally. Also, John pointed out that config could achieve maybe the same thing, because you can set global values in the config as well. So I'm not sure about that particular approach of multi-tenancy. It's debatable. I would prefer to use certain packages for multi-tenancy because they were built specifically for that. For context feature, I see the main use case is quick logging of certain quick variables. But what do you think? What use cases do you envision for such feature of context? Let's discuss in the comments below. And if you want to receive more news about Laravel 11, new features, new tools, and other related stuff, subscribe to the channel. I will keep shooting daily videos. That's it for this time, and see you guys in other videos.